Grand Bahama. From the air, shredded trees are almost as far as the eye can see. On the ground, debris is stacked higher than the roof of our taxi, and the stark contrast of this once vacationer's paradise isn't lost on us.
Now, this part of Grand Bahama is called High Rocks. It's where Dorian's eye came right on shore. Estimates the surge was well over 20 feet. Many homes here are completely destroyed. It's hard to see this incredible, beautiful ocean behind us. And then you just walk a few steps this way, and you see homes that are still standing but are completely destroyed. And the further inland you go, the more damage there is.
High Rocks is one of the oldest settlements on Grand Bahamas. It's a tight-knit community, a place where everyone knows your name. So for the families that survived the storm, and even the ones that didn't, every injury, every broken heart leaves a permanent scar deep within the Bahamian roots.
We're now on the east end of Grand Bahama. This is by far and away one of the hardest hit parts of the island. There's no electricity, no running water, no cellular service. What you see behind me is a fully functioning hospital, and it's the only place you can go if you need help on this part of the island. What you see behind me is a woman that was brought in after she had fainted at her home. She was trying to clean up from Hurricane Dorian when she became overwhelmed with heat and emotion.
She lost her great-grandchildren to Hurricane Dorian as she sifted through rubble today. Seeing her clothes and toys was just more than she could bear. She collapsed. This is life in one of the Grand Strands in the Bahamas on day 31. On special assignment, I'm Chief Digital Meteorologist Leslie Hudson in Grand Bahamas for MyRadar.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us on our week-long hurricane series, The Mean Season. Today we're going to tackle some tips you may or may not know that could help you stay better prepared for this year and keep you ahead of the storm.
Humans hate uncertainty. We have to know what's going on, when it's going to happen, and we want to know now. Predicting a hurricane's future is something we can't control, but we can control how well we prepare for them. Lesson 1. Wind isn't the major player, though it does grab the headlines. Freshwater flooding is the #1 killer of all hurricane hazards, including the storm surge. Oftentimes, that can lead to people under-preparing for a storm that causes major inland flooding. Hurricane Florence's rains were a catastrophic event for inland North and South Carolina. Yet Hurricane Michael left calling cards 500 miles away from Florida's Panhandle landfall. That included tens of thousands of people without power for weeks. Remember, a tropical storm has a long arm, and its strong winds and tropical rains don't stop at the beach. Lesson 2. Intensity forecasts are a distant second to forecast tracks. According to NASA, hurricane forecast tracks have improved by as much as 30% in just the last 10 years, and that forecast path verifies about 70% of the time. However, intensity forecasts, especially rapidly intensifying hurricanes, is much less accurate. Intensity forecasts have only improved less than 1% a year in the Atlantic Basin since the mid-1980s. The percentage is a little higher in the Pacific Ocean, but not by much. Hurricane Michael was a storm that rapidly intensified. That means Michael's hurricane winds increased by at least 35 miles an hour in a 24-hour period. Computer models hinted 2 to 3 days before Michael's landfall that it would likely become a major hurricane, but very few projections saw Michael becoming a Category 4 or 5 storm. Lesson 3. Don't let hurricane categories dictate your action plan. The Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale is the benchmark in identifying a storm's intensity. The scale allows the Hurricane Center to rate the potential extent of damage based on a hurricane's maximum sustained winds. But this scale is so ingrained in our society that it's often used as a method of motivation, and that can be dangerous. Research shows that residents will often stay for a Category 3 hurricane and only evacuate for a Category 4 or 5. History has shown that can lead to rescue efforts that not only put you in danger, but also the first responders who have to rescue you. Lesson 4. Rethink the risk. Time has shown over and over again that hurricane victims are often not prepared for the storm's magnitude because they never thought an event so severe would happen during their lifetime. Hurricane Harvey was a prime example. Before Harvey hit, more than 80% of Harris County buildings in Texas lacked flood insurance, and 3/4 of the homes that flooded during Harvey were outside the floodplains. Harvey drove home the fact that while rare, massive storms can happen, and when they do, many wish they had better prepared. When all was said and done, Harvey killed at least 88 people and caused over $125 billion in damage, tying for the costliest tropical cyclone on record. Lesson 5. Social media can be a blessing and a curse. During a weather catastrophe, social media can be the fastest way to get the word out about what's going on and where. Breaking weather will quickly trend on social media, which can help people that are in a storm's path. After the storm passes, someone that needs help, for example, can use social media to get the word out. Volunteers who track social media are then able to dispatch volunteers to help with boats and rescues. The volunteers are often able to head straight to the disaster zone, which leads to faster response times. However, it can lead to a lot of confusion as well. Proper safety protocols are not always followed, and volunteers can go into dangerous areas and not know it. Armchair meteorologists or non-trained weather enthusiasts can also falsely under or overplay the dynamics of a storm, and that can spread a tsunami of misinformation like wildfire. Bottom line is, storms can still surprise us even today. They can shatter records, make history, and even defy climatology. Preparing for the unexpected is what will likely keep you ahead of the storm. We hope you enjoyed our week-long hurricane series, The Mean Season, and hopefully offered some insights to get you better prepared for this 2019 hurricane season. Remember, Mother Nature is always unpredictable, powerful, and oftentimes intimidating. It just takes one storm to change your life in an instant. Hopefully, we'll all be prepared to stay ahead of the storms this year. On special assignment in Cocoa Beach, Florida, I'm meteorologist Leslie Hudson reporting for MyRadar. For MyRadar, I'm Chief Digital Meteorologist Leslie Hudson reporting from Grand Bahama. Now we're on the east end of the island. This was the hardest hit. They by far and away got the highest storm surge and wind Hurricane Dorian delivered. Today we're talking to healthcare officials and hospitals to see how they're caring for the people that got critically injured and need life support care around the clock. Believe it or not, this is a medical tent, and it's the only hospital in eastern Grand Bahama where you can get help if you need it. It's about 45 minutes away from the largest city on the island, Freeport. Power is spotty at best on the island, and it's a slow crawl forward as Bahamians dig out of the rubble and build momentum on the long road back to recovery. Most hurricane survivors have evacuated this part of the island, but there's a steady stream of patients that still trickle in all day long.
Yeah? Alright, why don't we put her...
The medical team thinks there will be a critical need for them to stay on this part of the hurricane-ravaged island for at least another 2 months, if not longer. Rand Memorial Hospital in Freeport is considered a total loss. The hospital took on 5 feet of water after Hurricane Dorian sat over this tropical island for more than a day and a half. About 300 patients and staff had to be evacuated. The medical staff never thought the hospital would flood. It's 5 miles from the coast. But no one ever anticipated that Dorian would stall over Freeport for more than 30 excruciating hours. Now, during the height of the storm, they knew they had to get the patients out of here quickly, so they came through the cafeteria. But the problem was the gurneys would not fit through, so they knocked down the walls here to get the patients safely out of harm's way and out through those double doors to safety. The hospital had just finished a state-of-the-art operating room, fully equipped with all the amenities you would find in the United States. The crazy part of all of this is, it still looks like it's in perfect shape, until you see the corroded wires and rust where the equipment sat in seawater for weeks.
Operating theater, and the fact that it's all destroyed is quite a challenge. If you look on the face of it to a normal eye, you can wheel someone in here. The space is clean. There are equipment monitors in place, but that's only on the surface because it's all been destroyed because of the salt water and the corrosion that has been caused by sitting in the water for a number of days. A significant amount of us have worked and built this hospital for years to make sure that our public has the best healthcare that we could deliver. So of course it is a challenge for us today that we are out of a healthcare facility, and we have to look to the future though with hope that we will be returned to a facility that provides proper healthcare for our community.
Sharon says the hospital will have to be torn down soon. They will need to rebuild on higher ground and with tougher building codes. Sharon is relying on the Bahamian government to make good on that promise to build sooner than later. This hurricane season isn't over, and Sharon knows all too well that next year's hurricane season will be here before you know it. On special assignment in Grand Bahama, I'm Chief Digital Meteorologist Leslie Hudson for MyRadar.
The first one was barely becoming a hurricane.
And good afternoon and welcome. Tropical Depression Cristobal is moving closer and closer to the United States with a possible strike in Louisiana as early as Sunday night or early Monday morning. Hi, everyone. I'm Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson. I am joined by meteorologist Stefanie Lauber and meteorologist Mike Linden.
What's going on, everybody? If you are not already, get social with us. We are everywhere nowadays. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Our handles are right there below. Follow us there. Or always be up to date.
Or on YouTube. We're also on YouTube. If you're not already a subscriber, now's a great time, especially since we've been giving this live series. If you click the notification bell, you'll get an alert for every time we drop a new video or when we are also live.
Now let's get an update on what's going on with Cristobal, you guys. So we've got the latest information. There are new watches for the United States that were put up by the National National Hurricane Center earlier today. So there is a tropical storm watch. You can see it there. It pretty much encompasses central Louisiana over through the coastline of Mississippi, over into Alabama, and just to the west of the Florida Panhandle. There is also a storm surge watch that's up for parts of this area of the country, as well as parts of Florida, you guys. So there is going to be impacts not only across the Gulf Coast, but in the Sunshine State as well. So we're going to be keeping an eye on how all of that plays out in the next 48 hours or so. The system itself is still over land. However, the National Hurricane Center says it's picked up some of its forward motion. Cristobal now moving north a little faster, so it could reemerge sometime earlier this afternoon as opposed to tonight, which was the original thinking. But you can see a big expansion of circulation that extends over Florida. There are flash flood watches across that state. And then here's a look at the path, which would take it very near Louisiana sometime on Sunday, and then moving up into the central U.S. and then kind of paralleling the Mississippi River Valley and headed up into the Great Lakes thereafter as an extratropical low. And it will be a huge rainmaker, not only for the Gulf Coast, but that area of the country as well. So a lot of folks need to watch this, not just, of course, along the Gulf Coast with the immediate impacts, but once it moves inland and once it will start to lose its tropical characteristics, becoming a rainmaker. We're hoping that a cold front will pick it up and move it quickly, so the rain totals will be less. But you can see the impact of the wind starting as early as Sunday. So if you live in this area, anywhere from extreme eastern Texas through all of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, the winds will start to pick up Sunday, and then we're going to see those sustained winds really ramp up Sunday night into the overnight and possibly into Monday as well. The exact timing still kind of being tweaked here. We've got to get it back into the Gulf of Mexico to get a true fix on the center of circulation, and then we'll have a much better picture of the exact timing. Now, I did run a computer model on the timing. This is just one estimate. So on this particular model, which is called the RPM, it's an in-house model that we tend to use a lot when we're trying to use extended forecasts. This one takes a landfall very near Sunday afternoon. If you watch the center of circulation, it kind of just crests there right around 2 o'clock. Again, this is guidance. This is not saying it's going to hit at 2 o'clock. Once it again gets into the Gulf of Mexico, we'll have a better idea of exact timing. But we've seen this system slow down. We've seen it speed up. And we're definitely going to be talking about timing. And even though we're talking about a tropical storm, a lot of folks think, oh, that's not a threshold for me to evacuate. If you get a storm surge warning, you need to leave. It is life-threatening. It can kill you, especially in Louisiana, where it's underwater, below sea level, I'm sorry. And there are many dangerous spots that can flood easily. So make sure you're paying attention. There is a storm surge watch already up. If you will get in that storm surge warning, which your local officials will let you know about, you definitely need to get out before it gets too dangerous.
And Hurricane Hunter aircraft have been flying into Cristobal to help put together the most up-to-date forecast for where the storm is heading next. And you can see what kinds of conditions they are up against: high wind, heavy rain, and of course frequent lightning, all to bring us the most accurate forecast of what the storm is expected to do next. That video is truly spectacular.
Yeah, somewhat frightening, and it's incredible to think there are people that don't shy away from these systems. They actively move into them, and we have one of those such hurricane hunters in-house. That's our very own storm chaser, Aaron Jack, and today he's going to show us a little taste of what it's like when he heads into these storms.
I am in Lauber, Florida, where the first outer bands of Hurricane Dorian are now making shore here on the beach. This is the first out at the end.
Hurricanes require the most preparation of any weather event. For the public, it's a long duration event because there's multiple days of planning as they get warned that there's watches and stuff coming their way, then the watches actually come in. And as the days leading up to the watches, people will start boarding up their homes, the windows to protect their homes, gathering supplies, or they just decide to evacuate. As a storm chaser, there's multiple obstacles to deal with when you're chasing a hurricane. First of all, as people are evacuating, you're going to have to deal with potentially road closings or with traffic being turned on interstates where both sides of the interstate have to go the same direction. So that may impede your ability to get down to where the hurricane is going to make landfall. But if you come a few days before that can get around that situation. But most of all, you don't want to be going into a disaster area there without bringing your own supplies, because you don't want to take supplies from the people that are living there and they're trying to evacuate there or are going to try and ride the storm out there. So you need to be able to self-rescue and self-extricate out of that disaster zone so you're not becoming a victim and taking away from the resources that should go to the people that live in that situation. Hurricanes can be a long-duration event with multiple days of lead time, giving a storm chaser an idea of where that storm might make landfall. So it's important to go up and down the coast to find a safe spot to ride that storm out. As a storm chaser, you want to look for somewhere with high elevation so you can avoid any kind of storm surge, so your vehicle doesn't get disabled, because you need that vehicle to be able to self-rescue, self-extricate yourself out of that disaster zone. But also that vehicle likely has your supplies, your food, and your plenty of water, weeks worth of water, and lots of food, first aid kits so you can rescue yourself and rescue others. Sometimes hurricanes can sit right off the coast for hours or days before they make landfall. Also, after the storm passes, with all the damage, there may be roads blocked. You may be unable to get out of that situation because of the road closures and blockades. And there's flooding, and everything's flooded over, and so that can add again to the long duration. So that's why it's important to have the plenty of supplies. I would expect to be out there for a couple of weeks at a time. As an example of a long duration event, Hurricane Harvey in 2017 was a powerful storm that came through the Gulf of Mexico and made landfall on the Texas Gulf Coast, and it slowly moved inland into Texas, towards central Texas a little bit, very slowly for about 2 days before it then started retreating back towards the Gulf Coast. And I moved along the coast towards Houston, and that's where the storm's most damage. There were powerful winds that came ashore when the storm made landfall, but as it made its landfall again in the Houston area, it brought torrential rains for days at a time, and the worst flooding event probably in history, I believe, happened there. And that was that hurricane. That was a long duration event that lasted months at a time. There were people that were being rescued for weeks after the hurricane. People that were having to cleanup lasted months and months. And so that's why these hurricanes can be a long duration event. And it's important, even as not just as a storm chaser, but if you live anywhere near where that hurricane may make landfall, it's important to have that food and that water even in your home if you're going to ride it out. Even if you're not on the coast, even if you're inland, the flooding can be the most powerful and most damaging part of these storms. My whole mission when I go into these disaster zones in this dangerous situation is to document what's happening there, both for people that are at home and want to see what's happening, for that powerful image of what nature is doing out there, but also capturing the history for future generations, or that video for future people that want to see what hurricanes did in the past, and maybe they're affected their family, their lineage way down the line in the future. Maybe they'll be interested in weather and they want to see. And I used to like watching those videos when I was a kid, videos that people before me had captured of weather events. And so that's what drives me. That's what gets me out there, is I want to do that. I want to be that person that captured what happened with these hurricanes.
I'll be chasing the storm here through the evening, afternoon, to the evening, and into tomorrow likely, maybe up into the Carolinas.
And now it is time to answer some of your questions. We've been soliciting you guys for weeks now, and we want to thank everyone that actually took the time to submit questions. We got a lot of good ones. We can't answer all of them in this particular seating, but we will try to answer them however you send them to us. We got a lot through email, so we'll go back and answer those. If you ask them in the comments on social media, we'll try and answer them there. But again, we're really excited to answer these. So our first one comes from Tucker, and he's asking, how do tropical depressions form? So really the best way to answer that is how do tropical cyclones form. So yesterday, remember, we talked about tropical cyclones, kind of a blanket term. So to get a tropical depression, you have to have a 1 minute average in a tropical depression of at least 38 miles an hour or less. Once it gets to 39 to 73, it would be considered a tropical storm. Above that is hurricane, and then we have the whole categories 1 through 5. But basically what happens is in the Atlantic Basin, we're going to talk about the Atlantic Basin in this example, there's warm water and there's warm air at the surface. As that air rises, it condenses and cools. And so there's an area of low pressure that will form down by the ocean temperatures because that air has lifted. It's very buoyant when it's warm. And as the higher it gets, it starts to condense, and then it gets to a certain level in the atmosphere and it starts to form clouds. Well, because we're north of the equator, the rotation of the Earth, everything starts to turn, the clouds start to slowly turn counterclockwise, and sometimes they get organized and get very well organized, and what start out as just a basic cluster of thunderstorms can quickly turn into a tropical depression, then a tropical storm, and then a hurricane. Remember, it's feeding on that warm air, it's pulling that warm sea surface temperatures up like a vacuum up into those clouds and pulling it, and then we get that vortex or that center of circulation. So as that continues to pull north and rise up into the atmosphere, we get a more organized system feeding off this warm air and this buoyant moisture that's down in the ocean. These engines, if you will, I like to call these systems well-defined engines, especially these well-organized Category 1 through 5s. They just look like big engines from a train, and they're just feeding off of that with this voracious appetite. So a great question. Hopefully that answered it for you.
So next question we have from Diane Carlson. This is a good one here. Do plantation shutters help on windows during hurricanes? And in short, no, they do not. If you don't know what a plantation shutter is, they're very trendy right now. I'm sure most of you have seen them before. There's a guide rail like in the middle of the shutters, and you close and open them from indoors. But it doesn't really matter what you have inside the window, it's what's outside of the window. The other day when we ran that story from Flash, what's really important if you don't have hurricane shutters is to use plywood on the outside of your windows. Daniel Smith, their lead engineer, also spoke to how that's what they look like there. What he spoke to is that unfortunately some people think that duct tape is a good idea on the outside of your windows, and that is just a bad idea as well, because if a projectile, a missile, which is anything flying in the air, whether it's a tree, your neighbor's yard decorations, a gnome, whatever, flying through your window, that duct tape is going to do pretty much nothing when it comes to protecting that window from coming in. You want to keep the wind from a hurricane outside of your home. As soon as it starts to get inside, you get the issues. So no, a plantation shutter, in short, certainly not going to help your windows during a hurricane. Shutters and then the plywood, two of the best things that you can do if you don't have the prefabricated shutters on your windows already.
Yeah, good question though, and it's easy to see where that thinking would come from. So great question, Sen. And we got another one from Meredith Carcella, who asks, why do storm surge predictions seem to be all over the place? Is there a specific model that will make them easier to understand? So I think to address this question, start off by saying, what is storm surge? And really, it's where the water's supposed to be, and then where it ends up being during the storm. So when you see 3 feet of storm surge, that's the water being 3 feet above where it's supposed to be, and you see it there in the video carrying all kinds of unpleasant surprises in that murky water. But this is actually a newer product issued by the National Hurricane Center. It became operational in 2017, and the model that they use is pretty incredible. It's called the slosh model, and it takes into account the individual shoreline of where these places are. So that's why when you see that product, it looks very colorful, because depending not only on what the terrain looks like, what roads are nearby, and how deep and steep that shoreline is, it's not only that that's taken into account, it's the direction of the storm. So if you were a kid in a pool, I guarantee you have splashed another person. So when you do that, you've got to push the water, and that's exactly what these tropical systems do. So they just push that water inland, and depending on the exact track that the storm is taking, the intensity, that's what dictates how this storm surge will affect your specific area. So as that forecast track changes, so does the storm surge prediction that comes with it. So that's some of the reason and the variability, but you should very much take them seriously, because storm surge kills half the
Yes.
deaths are responsible
Right.
of storm surge. So that's an excellent question. It's very important to get how severe that is.
Right.
And as we mentioned, there's storm surge watches already up for the U.S., so you really got to pay attention this weekend, you guys. Our next questions is from Elias. He has a couple, so we're going to start off with his first one. His first question is, do hurricanes produce hail or tornadoes? And the short answer to that is no. But you can get landfalling tornadoes during a landfalling hurricane. So I'll answer that part first. So what happens is the friction that comes with a hurricane or a tropical storm is massive. You have to remember these, again, are these big engines, sometimes 100, 150 miles across, and they're rotating counterclockwise. And it's kind of the analogy that I use a lot when we're doing live coverage is, imagine you're holding a piece of sandpaper, and here's a big giant cotton ball. So you're dragging, and the cotton ball is the hurricane. You're dragging this cotton ball over the friction, over this sandpaper, and it's creating friction at the surface. Well, that sometimes can create some instability in the atmosphere and can create what's called a wind shear. And as it rotates on shore, the winds, and remember, sometimes these systems, they're coming on shore 20 miles an hour. And so you've got winds coming in at 20 miles an hour out of the northeast. You may have a crosswind out of the west, and that's enough to create what we call wind shear and can create these brief spin-ups of tornadoes. It is very common in large hurricanes, but not just Cat 3, 4s, and 5s. You can get them in Cat 1s and Cat 2s. And even in tropical storms, you can sometimes get some tornadoes. So you'll see tornado watches issued. It's too early to say whether we'll see severe weather with Cristobal as it approaches the U.S., but you really got to be prepared, because if a tornado watch is issued for your area, there is definitely a risk of tornadoes forming. It is a common scenario, but strong EF 3, 4, 5s really are not common. They're usually weaker EF 0s, EF 1s, sometimes 2s, which can cause significant damage. They do not cause hail. That is when you have updrafts and downdrafts in a thunderstorm, and that's not a common characteristic that you would have with a hurricane, but you can get lightning, and we use the GOES satellite imagery and their lightning detection that's on the GOES 16 now to help us see the intensity and how strong these hurricanes are getting. So that is a great tool that we use. Why don't, his next question is why don't hurricanes hit California? They don't hit California. However, you can get leftovers from a Mexico cyclone in terms of a system that makes landfall in western Baja or sometimes along western Mexico. Some of that moisture can fill into California, and you can get some big time flooding in southern and central California. The general reason is why is same in the Atlantic Basin and the Pacific Basin. These cyclones tend to move towards the west-northwest, so away from California. That's a big component. There's two main reasons. That, and the second is the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean just can't support tropical development. You really got to have the number there is around 80 degrees Fahrenheit and or above. And as everyone knows, along the west coast of the United States, it's generally in the low 70s there in the ocean. It's very cold if you've been swimming there and you're from the east coast of the United States. So it doesn't support tropical development, so you wouldn't necessarily get something that would form off the coast, a couple hundred miles of California, and could sustain itself. You could get one that would come from the east side of the United States and maybe traverse across the continental U.S. Very unlikely, not a likely scenario, but that could be some leftover rain that California could see. But generally, systems go from the west to the east. Cold fronts, warm fronts, tropical cyclones, they all generally do that. His last question is, why do we fly airplanes into hurricanes? And Stefanie addressed this with her interview with Nicole earlier in the week, so I'll just touch on this. But generally, we're using aircraft to get upper air data. So we're looking for wind patterns, we're looking at high pressure centers, low pressure centers, cold fronts, warm fronts, all of that. around all the quadrants of a system, and that's also why we launch weather balloons as well, you guys. I mentioned that today in the Fast Forecast. We're launching balloons now every 6 hours to sample the atmosphere well ahead of Cristobal to see what's developing. Low pressure centers, high pressure centers that would help dictate its overall movement. So we use these aircraft, the Hurricane Hunters in particular, to take these dropsondes, these big discs that go down through the plane, shoot through the plane down to the surface of the ocean, and are taking samples of the atmosphere the whole way down. It's just like the movie Twister, kind of, if you've ever seen it. You know, I'm dating myself, but that was a really big movie.
It's a classic
yes.
weather movie.
But it kind of, you know, and they've actually, you know, there's been data where they've tried to do this, but they're taking samples of the atmosphere all the way down, you know, checking barometric pressure, winds, dew points, humidities, and that all tells how buoyant the atmosphere, what's going to support tropical development. If there's dry air in training or moving into the tropical cyclone, if we see lower humidities at different levels, we can tell that there's dry air that would inhibit its development. So all of that goes into these big computers, spits out information that we all just try and put into one nice, neat, tied bow for you. But there's a lot that goes into it. But lots of great questions, Elias. Thanks for sending those in.
Yeah, this is the Hurricane Hunters, a whole new definition of storm chasing. I mean, totally new definition of storm chasing. Next question here comes to us from a frequent contributor here on MyRadar. Big shout out to Sandy Rose, and her question is, and I guess it is kind of twofold, has there ever been another hurricane as large or larger than Dorian, of course, last year, that reached landfall and practically stood still for anywhere near 36 hours as Dorian did? So we're going to break that into two parts here. First, as far as Dorian's size, roughly 280 miles wide, which hurricanes are all about perspective, right? Because they are gigantic, as Leslie touched on before. 280 miles wide, that's pretty big. It's about the size, or at least the width, of the state of Georgia, to put things into perspective. Now, Sandy, you asked if there's ever been a hurricane larger than Dorian. Absolutely. Hurricane Michael, just a few years before Dorian, 350 miles wide. That's roughly the size of the state of Colorado. Then we go up again to Hurricane Irma. This was a record setter, 420 miles wide. So that's nearly, give or take, double the size of Hurricane Dorian. As far as the strength, intensity, all of the other characteristics that separate the two, there are certainly a lot of them, but in terms of size, I mean, in short, plenty of storms that are larger than Dorian. But Dorian was very strong for what it was. And then, of course, Hurricane Andrew, which if you've lived in the state of Florida, you certainly know that that was a big one, to say the very least. Smaller than all of them, 200 miles wide. So in terms of the standing still for practically near 36 hours as Dorian did, I ask you guys, has there been a storm that has done that?
Sitting around is a different, you know, that the whole other can of worms there. Whenever they lose steering currents and they kind of just hang out,
yeah,
that's a problem. Irma did maintain its Category 5 status for somewhere around 37, 40 hours, but I don't think it necessarily stayed in one place. Dorian really made a name for itself in my recent memory as a storm that really kind of just parked it.
Yeah, I didn't look it up, but I don't recall one maintaining that strength, and I do believe it set a record, at keeping that threshold. The only other hurricane I know that that I've covered since I've been doing this for 20-something years was Hurricane Patrice, which was a Category 5 and maintained its status for a while, but then it quickly deflated down to a tropical depression within 24 to 36 hours. And that one was, again, kind of tied with Dorian on being one of the strongest tropical cyclones to ever hit. That was down in the Caribbean islands, and that one was a really scary one. The other one I was going to touch on when we were talking about big ones was Hurricane Floyd, because I was in Orlando market, and that one was over 400 miles wide as well.
Both sides of the state?
Yes, and it paralleled the state of Florida. I remember tracking it. I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. This thing is so big. So they really are. It really takes it to get it next to a state. And Florida actually, unfortunately, it's a great way to get perspective, because it's just kind of hanging out there by itself. You know, it's a peninsula. So you can really gain perspective of these things when they're by themselves. So, you know, another question that someone asked, I was actually trying to find it here real quick, that a lot of people have been asking us is, will Cristobal become a hurricane? So, you know, a lot of the guidance, we're looking at guidance. You know, we don't have crystal balls. We can't tell anyone what's going to happen in 5 days.
Only.
Right?
Only.
Or the Hurricane Center can't either. You know, they have guidance, they use all these supercomputers that we talked about. But, you know, most of the guidance, and again, we talk about this a lot, intensity is the hardest thing to figure out. We don't know what it's going to do when it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. It could strengthen more than what's forecast. That's why we really got to watch it this weekend. But most of the guidance doesn't take it as that. There is indications that there is some of that drier air at the mid-levels and lower levels of the atmosphere. That's what the Hurricane Hunter picked up on. So once that dry air, it kind of cuts off the food source down to getting down to the ocean. So it's not likely to make it to hurricane strength, but you can't say yes or no for sure. So we want to make sure people are staying really vigilant about that as we head into this weekend. And Steph will be here. I'm going to be joining Steph on Sunday as well, just to, you know, kind of keep everybody in the loop. And it's really an important time, you guys, to really stay vigilant. And Steph will have updates all weekend for you. All right, let's talk about the updated information from the Hurricane Center. As we mentioned, there are tropical storm watches up for the southeastern United States, mainly Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama. There's also that storm surge watch. That's what we talked about. If you get upgraded to a storm surge warning, you really need to go heed the advice of your local officials. Your local officials, you're not going to get it off of a national network. You're not going to necessarily get it off of your weather radio. You should, but it's your local government that will tell you if you need to evacuate. And if they say you need to evacuate, you need to do so, you guys. They don't issue these evacuations lightly. And storm surge, as Stefanie mentioned, is one of the #1 killers, that and freshwater flooding. So please make sure you're listening to what the officials tell you this weekend. There's the updated path from the National Hurricane Center with an impact sometime possibly Sunday and then lingering into the overnight hours. It'll be a huge rainmaker for Louisiana, unfortunately. Remember, below sea level, concerned about the flooding risk there. I know they're going to be under a flood warning. There's going to be all kinds of risks across the Gulf Coast. And then as we head into the weekend and into next week, we're still going to be talking about the leftovers of Cristobal. It will be something that will move up into the Great Lakes, into the central United States, kind of mirroring just to the west of the Mississippi River Valley. Lots of flooding problems, I think, with the rivers and the tributaries in that area of the country. So again, even if you're living up in the Great Lakes, you need to be talking about a plan in place, because I do think a lot of areas that live along these large rivers are going to have problems as this system comes in. All right, there's a look at the estimated land arrival of winds. So again, Sunday is the go day for the winds. You already need to have your preps done by Sunday. Today, tomorrow is the day to do it, because even though, again, people say, oh, it's just a depression, oh, it's just a tropical storm. Listen, those things can put down some serious, serious problems. Imelda last year was one of the wettest tropical cyclones ever to hit the U.S. It slammed into Texas. There were thousands of rescues, I think over 35,000 if I'm remembering correctly. So please take this all seriously, you guys. And before we leave, you know, we just want to kind of touch on some of our own experiences. We've all been in this business a while, some longer than others, but we want to first thank you guys for sticking with us these 5 days, again, navigating the storm. But Stefanie, I'll start with you. I know that you're a native of Florida, right?
You can say that most of my life.
I couldn't remember, but I know you spent a lot of time in South Florida. So, and you've been in the business a while too. So, what are some of your experiences from covering tropical hurricanes, tropical cyclones, hurricanes that you want to share with everybody that might be interesting?
To touch on that, I call myself a native. I moved here when I was 4. My parents were snowbirds, and they said, all right, we're moving to paradise. So we went to Florida, and I don't think they really were prepared for, yes, paradise comes at a price. Every summer you've got to watch out for these things. But I think my earliest remembering of tropical systems was in the late 90s, where one time a Halloween storm, I remember it being Irene in 97 or 98, that just swept all the pumpkins down the parkway from the pumpkin patch.
Wow.
And the flooding was incredible. And actually, folks in my hometown were talking about that this week, because they recently had some tropical moisture from Bertha that came through, and that was the worst flooding since the storm in the late 90s. So that, and then covering a storm like Matthew again, we had a long drought where we hadn't seen any really big, close, relevant tropical systems. So that's kind of where this is all kicked back up again with activity in the tropics. And for me, you know, it's just a really humbling experience, not only to go and live through them, but to try to keep people safe when these things come by. It's not a responsibility I think any of us take lightly at all, especially being native Floridians. And Mike, welcome to Florida. Here's Dorian.
Yeah, no kidding. It was definitely a welcome. All the things that went on with Dorian. But Stefanie, you and I were talking yesterday. It's kind of like when you hear a song, maybe for the first time, if you're on a road trip with your family, and you kind of attach that memory to a song. Weather's kind of the same way. Having gone through an event, you kind of can call back to it almost really vividly, like a lucid dream. And for me, Hurricane Bonnie kind of got me down the path of wanting to get into this business. Now, Bonnie, compared to Floyd and all the storms that we've mentioned, Michael, Dorian, kind of on the smaller scale of things. But I just remember being on vacation with my family. The beach was there. The waves were a little rough. We go to sleep. We wake up. Beach is gone, like totally gone. And the winds were blowing around. Seeing garbage cans flying like up really high into the air. It's a visual I will not forget. And we had to leave where we were in Ocean City, Maryland, my family and I. And that kind of was a real humbling experience to let you know that Mother Nature is bigger than all of us. And that is one memory that will really stick with my mind. Floyd, too, made its way all the way up to where I lived in New York, too, and the flooding was not good at all. So hurricanes in general, again, it's something about the weather, those really distinct memories that just latch onto it. I'm sure you guys you have plenty of those too.
Yeah, when I was in high school, not to date myself there, but the 2004 and 2005 season really caused a lot of problems. I was a band geek, and we had very little performances that we were able to go to because these storms, Charlie just wiping through. I remember driving up the next year in 2000, Charlie was 2004, and in 2005, when we were driving up to a band competition, it just looked like a war zone. Trees were still down. That was a year later. And even in recent trips headed to the Panhandle, Michael's damage is still very evident when you head out there. So it's incredible how these storms shape communities.
Yeah, it's, we're running out of time, so I have probably dozens of examples I could share with you guys, but I'll just quickly, because I know we're trying to wrap up here real quick. The first one, I'll tell you about the first one and then the most memorable. First one was when I was a kid, 1980, Hurricane David came across Palm Beach County where I lived, lost power, and that was terrifying. Went out in the eye, saw the eye with my dad. We were boarded up. We live on the ocean. Wow. And so it was terrifying, but it was also, again, a moment where I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I really think this is fascinating. But I will say my dad was barbecuing later when we were out of power for a week and set our house on fire.
Whoa.
Because he didn't have the propane set right. So you gotta be careful. The fire department had to come like 3 days after the hurricane, and it was a Category 1, but man, it was terrifying. And then just quickly, I've done a lot of coverage. I've covered Dorian, Michael, Matthew, Florence, all the storms in Florida. My whole career, I've been in the state of Florida just about, so I've covered a lot of hurricanes. But by far, the most memorable was when I was in school, and was Andrew. And I was in Palm Beach County. Of course, it hit Dade County, but I was freelancing or interning. I was still in school for an ABC affiliate. Went with a photographer down there. She lived in Homestead. And this was her first day driving into Hurricane Andrew's destruction, and she was so overwhelmed. Her parents grew up there. She couldn't find her neighborhood, couldn't find her home. They had to. I wasn't allowed to drive the truck because I wasn't old enough. They had to send a crew down to pick her up. She was so emotionally distraught. Her parents evacuated. They were fine. The family was fine, but it was, I'll never forget it. It was just leveled like Dorian was, like a tornado. Never forgot it. And I still to this day, every time I see her, Lonnie is her name, it's one of the first things I ask her, how's her family doing? It really is unbelievable till it directly impacts you guys, how this can change your life, how a storm like that can change your life. It changed mine, and we got very little damage from Andrew, but it decimated, Dade and Broward counties.
Dorian, for many reasons too. I mean, you adopted a puppy.
I did. We almost brought him, but he's such a bad boy. And the cat, and the crazy cat, BB. They're both great. He's huge. I'll bring him here maybe one of the other tropical seasons. All right. So again, you guys, this was really great, you guys.
I can't believe it's Friday.
I can't believe it's Friday either. I know it's been such a long week, but it's been a great week. I think everybody's had really good information. The stories were great. The content was wonderful. We're biased, or I'm biased, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. It'll be on, I believe, Mike, it's going to be on YouTube, right? We're going to put everything up on YouTube.
Yep.
And you can catch all of our stories there if you missed them. We'll answer questions, go back and answer those for you. And again, we just want to thank you for stopping in and taking time with us to navigate the storm. We will be around all hurricane season. You will see all three of us. We will be covering these storms for you in the app, on social media. Stefanie will be here starting tomorrow, covering, of course, Cristobal. I'll join her on Sunday, and we hope that you all stay safe in Louisiana, across the Gulf Coast. Make your preps now, and thank you again for joining us on Navigating the Storm. Stay safe, everybody.